In Cobb County, Georgia, a mother and her 3 children were found dead at their dinner table just 7 days after opening their home to someone they thought they could trust. The friend who had moved in wept and dialed 911, claiming she had no idea what went wrong. But behind those tears was a secret that stretched back years. An affair, a bitter custody war, and a plan so ruthless it left seasoned investigators stunned. And when detectives began pulling apart the story, they uncovered a conspiracy so cold that it turned the definition of friendship into something unrecognizable. In the summer of 2022, the Family Division of Cobb County Superior Court was packed with routine custody hearings, but one case stood out for its bitterness. At the center of it was Tasha Mitchell, a 34-year-old mother of 3 who had spent nearly 2 years in and out of court fighting her ex-husband, Eric Mitchell, for the right to raise their children in peace. What had begun as a marriage in Marietta filled with hope had quickly soured into accusations, slammed doors, and late-night arguments neighbors often overheard. By the time Tasha filed for divorce, Eric's drinking, his disappearing acts, and rumors of infidelity had left her with little choice. The divorce dragged on longer than she expected. Eric challenged everything: custody, division of assets, even visitation schedules. He painted himself as the wronged party, a father unfairly pushed out of his children's lives. But the court saw something else: a man who hadn't paid consistent bills, who avoided responsibility, and who rarely showed up for school events or medical appointments. The evidence piled up: receipts, witness statements, financial records, and it painted Eric as unreliable and unfit for full custody. Tasha, by contrast, worked steadily at a dental office and leaned on her mother, Gloria Daniels, to help with child care. She wasn't wealthy, but she was steady. The judge made a ruling that reflected that stability. Tasha would receive full physical custody of the children: 12-year-old Ariana, 9-year-old Bryson, and 6-year-old Chloe, while Eric would only be allowed supervised visitation twice a month at a family services center. On top of that, the court ordered him to pay $1,200 each month in child support, a figure based on his income from warehouse work and side contracting jobs. The decision was a victory for Tasha, but it came at a cost. Eric left the courthouse red-faced, muttering under his breath about paying for kids he barely got to see. Friends later recalled how his resentment boiled over in conversations. He claimed Tasha was bleeding him dry, that she had turned the children against him, and that the court system had made him nothing more than a wallet. For Tasha, the order meant survival. The support payments covered rent, groceries, and the children's school needs. She knew Eric hated it, but she believed the structure of the ruling would at least protect her kids from his instability. What she didn't know was that the resentment burning inside Eric wouldn't fade. Instead, it would fester, and eventually, it would find an ally in the one person she trusted most. Just as the custody battle seemed to settle, another storm crept into Tasha Mitchell's life, this time disguised as friendship. Sabrina Fields had been close to Tasha since high school. Over the years, their paths had crossed and parted, but whenever Sabrina needed something, Tasha was the kind of friend who never turned her away. By 2022, Sabrina was once again in trouble. She had bounced from one job to another: waitressing, call center work, short stints in retail, never able to hold anything steady. Now, with past due notices piling up and her landlord threatening eviction, she showed up at Tasha's townhouse door with a small bag and a desperate story. Sabrina painted herself as a woman cornered by bad luck. She talked about paychecks that didn't stretch, bills that doubled overnight, and the humiliation of moving between relatives' couches. Her voice cracked as she explained she had nowhere else to turn. And Tasha, soft-hearted and trusting, couldn't ignore her. "Just until you get back on your feet," she told her, offering a spare room. For Tasha, it wasn't just about housing a friend, It was about extending the same grace she once needed when the divorce first left her unsteady. But not everyone believed Sabrina's struggles were as innocent as she claimed. Gloria Daniels, Tasha's mother, made her concern plain. She had never trusted Sabrina's inconsistency, her tendency to show up only when she needed something. "That girl doesn't wish you well, Tasha," Gloria warned. "She'll take what you give and still want more. Don't bring trouble under your roof." Tasha brushed it off, believing her loyalty meant more than suspicion. To her, Sabrina was a friend who had lost her footing, not a threat. Even Pastor Howard Lane, who had counseled Tasha through the worst of her divorce, offered quiet words of caution. After a Sunday service, he reminded her that rebuilding required boundaries. "Be careful who you let in," he told her, his voice measured but firm. "The enemy doesn't always come with a warning label." Tasha smiled politely, but her heart leaned toward compassion. To her, Sabrina wasn't a danger. She was family by choice. While Tasha Mitchell was extending her home and her trust, she had no idea she was sleeping under the same roof with the woman who had already crossed one of the worst boundaries possible. Sabrina Fields wasn't just her longtime friend, she was also her ex-husband's hidden lover. The relationship had begun quietly years earlier, back when Tasha and Eric Mitchell were still married. It started with casual conversations, a drink shared after work, and escalated into secret meetings that Tasha never suspected. They became careful architects of their affair. Sabrina saved Eric's number in her phone under a woman's name. Their conversations were short and coded, often deleted after midnight exchanges. They arranged meetups in parking lots, motels off I-75, and dimly lit diners where no one would recognize them. To outsiders, their paths barely crossed, but in reality, their connection deepened in secrecy, strengthened by the very risk that should have exposed them. By the time the Mitchell marriage collapsed in court, Sabrina and Eric had grown accustomed to living in the shadows. With Tasha gone, they no longer needed to sneak around, but they still couldn't appear openly together. Sabrina was supposed to be Tasha's closest confidant. To reveal their relationship too soon would destroy the cover that allowed their conversations to continue unchecked. And in those conversations, bitterness became the glue that bound them. Eric raged about the court order, about paying $1,200 every month for children he barely saw, about being forced to sit in supervised rooms where strangers dictated how he could father his own kids. He complained that Tasha had won, painting himself as the victim of a broken system. Sabrina listened, fed by her own envy of Tasha's resilience and the life she had managed to rebuild. It was in the stillness of late-night calls and whispered complaints that their resentment toward Tasha hardened. What began as shared bitterness soon turned into an idea. One whispered in half-jokes at first, then repeated with conviction. If Tasha was gone, Eric would be free of court orders, free of payments, free of supervised visits. And if Sabrina helped him, she wouldn't just be his lover in secret, she could be his partner in life, standing beside him with none of Tasha's shadow hanging over them. Their secret was now more than an affair. It was a conspiracy forming in silence, under the nose of the one woman who trusted them both the most. 4 months, Sabrina Fields had juggled overdue bills, eviction threats, and the humiliation of bouncing between temporary jobs. When she poured out her struggles to Eric Mitchell, it wasn't just a plea for sympathy, it became the spark that ignited something far more sinister. Eric, already bitter over child support and custody restrictions, saw her desperation as the perfect opportunity. He suggested what seemed, on the surface, like an act of practicality: move in with Tasha. She'll take you in. She always does. The idea slid easily into place because it matched Tasha's history of compassion. Eric knew her better than anyone. She couldn't resist helping people she loved, even at her own expense. Sabrina agreed, realizing that stepping into Tasha's home wouldn't just solve her financial troubles, It would also position her exactly where Eric needed her to be. From that point, their late-night phone calls turned from complaints to logistics. They discussed how quickly Tasha would offer her spare room, how Sabrina could earn the children's trust, how routine family dinners would be the perfect cover. Sabrina's role would be to act grateful, helpful, and indispensable. Eric's role would be to remove the one barrier standing in their way, how to ensure the deaths looked accidental. Through a coworker with questionable side hustles, Eric managed to obtain a small quantity of a restricted pesticide compound, a highly toxic chemical never meant for household use. He kept it hidden in an unmarked container, handing it off to Sabrina in a late-night meeting at a gas station parking lot. Just enough, he told her, to end the problem without leaving a trace. Sabrina, her hands trembling as she slipped it into her purse, understood the gravity of what she was carrying. The plan was as cold as it was calculated. Sabrina would become part of the household, blending in until the time felt right. Then, when trust was high and suspicion was low, she would lace a family meal with the poison. The children would eat without question. Tasha would sit across from her, smiling in gratitude. And by the time the night ended, for lives would be extinguished in a way that could be explained away as foodborne illness. At least long enough for Sabrina and Eric to walk free. What Sabrina and Eric underestimated, however, was how careful investigators could be when tragedy struck a mother and 3 children at once. Their plan was airtight in whispers, but in execution, it would begin to unravel almost as soon as it started. When Sabrina Fields arrived at Tasha Mitchell's townhouse in early October, she didn't come with much, just 2 duffel bags, a forced smile, and rehearsed gratitude. Tasha welcomed her in with open arms, guiding her to the small spare room near the children's bedrooms. Just until you get back on your feet, Tasha reminded her, and Sabrina nodded, masking the calculation already playing out in her mind. It didn't take long for Sabrina to slip into the rhythm of the household. She offered to fold laundry, helped with school drop-offs, and cooked meals with the kind of enthusiasm that made her seem indispensable. To Ariana, Bryson, and Chloe, she was instantly anti-Sabrina. Ariana liked how Sabrina let her paint her nails on weekends. Bryson enjoyed the way she played video games with him, pretending to lose just to make him laugh. Chloe, the youngest, clung to her constantly, delighted by Sabrina's silly bedtime songs. For Tasha, it felt like confirmation that she had made the right decision. A friend in need had found stability, and her children were happier with someone else in the house to give them attention. She confided to her mother, Gloria Daniels, that it was a blessing to have help, brushing off Gloria's disapproval. "She's not trouble, Mama," Tasha insisted. "She's family." Gloria's warning tone only deepened, but Tasha's trust drowned it out. What Tasha couldn't see was that Sabrina's devotion was split. Every night, when the house settled into silence, Sabrina crept onto the porch or into the bathroom with her phone. She sent Eric Mitchell careful updates, how the kids' routines worked, when meals were usually cooked, when Tasha seemed most relaxed. Sometimes she snapped quick photos, an open spice rack, the pantry shelves, the kitchen counters, proof that she was studying every detail. Eric replied with short, terse instructions, "Stay patient. Wait for the right night. I'll let you know when." Inside the home, Sabrina was trusted like family. Outside of it, in hidden calls and coded texts, she was preparing to destroy the very people who had given her a bed and called her one of their own. Every smile she offered, every bedtime story she read, was another step toward carrying out the plan that would end 4 lives in the most intimate setting possible, their own dinner table. For the first week, life inside Tasha Mitchell's townhouse appeared as normal as any other family home in Cobb County. Sabrina Fields slid into the household routine so smoothly that no one looking in from the outside would have suspected a thing. Mornings began with the usual rush, packing lunches, tying shoelaces, reminding Ariana, Bryson, and Chloe to grab their backpacks before heading out the door. Sabrina was right there in the mix, offering to drive them to school or standing at the kitchen counter pouring cereal alongside Tasha. In the afternoons, she folded laundry, ran small errands, and prepared dinner as if she had been a permanent fixture in the family. Neighbors saw her at the mailbox, laughing with Tasha, or walking hand in hand with Chloe to the nearby park. To anyone watching, it looked like a simple act of kindness. A loyal friend stepping in to help a single mother who had endured a bruising divorce. The children adored her. Ariana invited her to sit in on homework sessions. Bryson bragged to classmates that Auntie Sabrina could beat any level in his video game, and Chloe followed her from room to room, chattering as if Sabrina had always been part of the family. Their attachment only reinforced Tasha's belief that she had done the right thing. Having Sabrina around lightened the load, and for once, the townhouse felt less heavy with responsibility. But Gloria Daniels remained uneasy. When she visited, she noticed the way Sabrina inserted herself into every corner of the household, always close, always watching. Gloria mentioned it gently, suggesting that maybe Sabrina was leaning a little too heavily on Tasha's generosity. "You've got to protect your peace, baby," she warned. Tasha brushed it off with a smile, insisting that Gloria was reading too much into things. "She's just grateful, Mama. That's all." Even Pastor Howard Lane, in a phone call, asked how she was adjusting to having another adult in the home. He didn't press, but he urged Tasha once more to stay watchful. Tasha, however, saw no signs of trouble. To her, Sabrina's presence was a blessing, one that allowed her to breathe easier after years of court battles and stress. For 7 days, Sabrina played her role perfectly. The townhouse was filled with laughter, routine, and a sense of normalcy that made Tasha drop her guard completely. What no one could see was that beneath Sabrina's helpful smiles, the plan was quietly ticking toward its fatal moment. On the evening of the 7th day, Sabrina Fields suggested something that seemed thoughtful, even routine. "Let me cook tonight," she told Tasha Mitchell, insisting that after a long week of juggling work and 3 children, Tasha deserved a break. Tasha smiled, grateful for the gesture, and handed over the kitchen without hesitation. Sabrina moved with quiet purpose. She chose pasta, a family favorite, something the children would never question. As the water boiled and the sauce simmered, she retrieved the small container Eric had given her days earlier. Inside was the restricted pesticide compound that had been smuggled into her hands in a parking lot handoff. She measured carefully, mixing just enough into the sauce to ensure its potency while still masking the taste. To anyone watching, it looked like she was stirring in spices. When the food was served, the children's faces lit up. Ariana twirled her fork in the noodles. Bryson asked for seconds before his plate was halfway empty, and Chloe giggled as sauce smeared across her cheek. Tasha ate heartily too, thanking Sabrina for stepping in. Only Sabrina herself avoided the meal, claiming she wasn't hungry and nibbling at a piece of bread instead. Her excuse slipped by unnoticed. No one questioned the friend who had done them such a kindness. Hours later, the townhouse descended into horror. It began with Ariana clutching her stomach, complaining of sudden pain. Minutes later, Bryson doubled over, vomiting violently. Chloe started seizing before Tasha even understood what was happening. Then Tasha herself collapsed, gasping for breath, her body convulsing on the living room floor. The scene spiraled into chaos, 3 children crying and screaming in terror, their mother fighting to stay upright, all of them crumbling under the same invisible attack. The sound of Sabrina Fields' frantic voice filled the 911 dispatcher's headset just after 9 p.m. She screamed into the phone, describing children vomiting and a mother collapsing, her words tumbling over each other in feigned panic. "Please hurry, I don't know what's happening." They're all sick, they can't breathe." The address came out between sobs, and within minutes, red and blue lights painted the quiet suburban street in Cobb County. Paramedics rushed inside to a scene of devastation. Tasha Mitchell and her 3 children, Ariana, Bryson, and Chloe, lay sprawled across the living room floor, unresponsive. The air was heavy with the acidic odor of vomit, plates of pasta still half-eaten on the table. Medics moved swiftly, checking pulses, attempting CPR, administering oxygen, but nothing revived them. After repeated efforts, all 4 were pronounced dead on the spot. Through it all, Sabrina played her part. She paced and wailed, clutching her face as if the horror was too much to bear. To paramedics, she was the devastated survivor who had watched her best friend and 3 innocent children collapse in front of her. When investigators arrived to question her, Sabrina's story was simple and convincing. She had eaten almost nothing of the dinner because she wasn't hungry, just a piece of bread. She insisted she had no idea what could have caused such a sudden tragedy. The initial theory leaned toward accidental poisoning. Foodborne illness, something tainted in the pasta sauce, perhaps bad meat or contaminated produce, was floated as the explanation. Investigators noted the empty plates, the uniformity of symptoms, and the timing, all of which mimicked an outbreak scenario. For the moment, Sabrina's tears shielded her from suspicion. She was documented as the lone survivor, the lucky one, who had escaped a deadly meal by sheer chance. But even as detectives left that night, something about the scene unsettled them. It was too sudden, too absolute. Food poisoning didn't usually silence an entire family within hours. What looked like a freak accident at first glance would soon unravel into a chilling homicide investigation, one where Sabrina's role would no longer be that of a grieving friend, but the architect of betrayal. When the bodies of Tasha Mitchell and her 3 children were brought to the Cobb County Medical Examiner's office, the staff immediately noted how unusual the case was. Food poisoning could make people sick, yes, but 4 healthy individuals collapsing and dying within hours from the same meal? That alone raised suspicion. The speed of their deaths suggested something far more lethal than spoiled food. During the autopsies, the medical examiner found no signs consistent with common bacterial foodborne illness. Instead, samples sent for toxicology revealed a startling clue. All 4 victims carried traces of a highly toxic pesticide compound, one not found in ordinary household products. It was the kind of chemical restricted to agricultural or industrial use, not something that could have accidentally slipped into a family dinner. The discovery shifted the case instantly from accident to homicide. Detectives returned to the townhouse, retracing every detail. They questioned neighbors, none of whom recalled anything unusual in the days leading up to the tragedy. Then their focus turned back to Sabrina Fields, the sole survivor. At first, she repeated the same story. She hadn't eaten much of the pasta, just some bread, which was why she hadn't gotten sick. She cried, insisting she loved Tasha like a sister and adored the children. But her demeanor began to crack under closer scrutiny. Investigators pressed her on inconsistencies. Why had she cooked dinner but not eaten it? Why had she been so insistent on preparing the meal that night? And how could she explain the presence of a pesticide compound inside the victim's systems? Each answer sounded shakier than the last. While she still maintained innocence, detectives quietly marked her as more than just a grieving friend. She was now the prime person of interest in what was becoming one of the most disturbing family homicides Cobb County had seen in years. As suspicions around Sabrina Fields mounted, detectives began digging into her background. Surveillance canvassing soon revealed something that broke her image as the devastated friend. She had been seen meeting with Eric Mitchell, Tasha's ex-husband, on multiple occasions in the weeks leading up to the deaths. Gas station cameras, parking lot footage, and even receipts placed them together at odd hours, often late at night. When investigators seized Sabrina's phone, they found it had been wiped of recent messages. But forensic specialists at the Cobb County Sheriff's Office lab retrieved fragments of deleted texts. Among them were chilling exchanges with Eric. One read, "The money problem being gone soon." Another, "Just stay patient. It won't be long." The cryptic tone suggested more than venting. It suggested planning. Detectives then turned to Eric's financial records. Subpoenaed bank statements revealed large cash withdrawals shortly before Sabrina moved in with Tasha. The amounts didn't match his usual spending habits and appeared deliberately untraceable. Investigators suspected the money had gone toward acquiring the pesticide compound later found in toxicology reports. The combination of these findings shifted the case from puzzling tragedy to a clear conspiracy. What began as the apparent misfortune of a contaminated meal now carried the hallmarks of premeditated homicide. Sabrina was no longer a grieving bystander. She was directly connected to Eric, the very man who stood to benefit from Tasha's death. For prosecutors, the narrative was becoming undeniable. A resentful ex-husband drowning under child support, a secret lover desperate for stability, and a plan that weaponized Tasha's kindness against her. With each discovery, the picture sharpened, and it left no doubt that the deaths of Tasha and her children were not an accident, but a calculated betrayal. The turning point came when investigators laid out the full chain of evidence before the Cobb County District Attorney's Office. The pesticide compound in toxicology, the deleted texts recovered from Sabrina Field's phone, the surveillance footage tying her to Eric Mitchell, and the suspicious withdrawals from his bank account. With the picture complete, warrants were issued. Sabrina was the first to be taken in. Detectives arrived at the townhouse where she had been staying with a relative since the deaths. She broke into tears as officers cuffed her, insisting she had done nothing wrong, but the charges were clear, for counts of malice murder, one for Tasha Mitchell and each of her 3 children. The betrayal cut even deeper given her role in the household, the Auntie Sabrina, who had been trusted with bedtime stories and family meals. Eric's arrest came hours later. Deputies tracked him to his Marietta apartment, where he was led out in handcuffs as neighbors looked on in disbelief. His charges were different but no less severe. Criminal solicitation of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Detectives believed he had not only provided the poison but orchestrated the plan to eliminate the child support and custody obligations he resented so deeply. At a press conference announcing the arrests, Gloria Daniels stood before microphones with trembling hands. Her voice broke as she recalled warning her daughter not to trust Sabrina. "I told her to be careful, but Tasha's heart was too big. She believed loyalty was stronger than envy. And now my baby and my 3 grandbabies are gone." Her words pierced through the courtroom-style silence, a painful reminder of how close the warnings had been and how devastatingly they had been ignored. The community's reaction was one of disbelief and outrage. Neighbors who had seen Sabrina playing with the children, who had smiled at her across the driveway, now struggled to reconcile that image with the reality of her arrest. Church members who remembered Tasha's faithfulness mourned not only her death but the brutal irony that the woman she defended against criticism had been her undoing. By the time both Sabrina and Eric were booked into the Cobb County Jail, the story had moved beyond shock. It had become a chilling parable about betrayal, greed, and the cost of misplaced trust. The trials ahead promised to unmask every detail of their conspiracy, but the damage was already carved deep into the community. Tasha's compassion, the very quality that defined her, had been weaponized against her and her children with lethal precision. The trial of Sabrina Fields and Eric Mitchell opened in Cobb County Superior Court less than a year after the deaths of Tasha Mitchell and her 3 children. Prosecutors wasted no time framing the case for the jury. This was not just homicide, but a betrayal layered with cruelty. They spoke of a mother who offered her best friend shelter, children who called that friend auntie, and the calculated plan that turned trust into a weapon. This was not random, the lead prosecutor told jurors. It was deliberate, it was selfish, and it was done with one purpose: to erase obligations and start fresh on the ashes of a family. The evidence stacked high. Toxicologists explained the pesticide compound found in the victim's systems, emphasizing its rarity and controlled use. Digital forensic experts walked the jury through the recovered text messages between Sabrina and Eric. Phrases like, "the money problem being gone soon," and "stay patient," leaving little room for misinterpretation. Surveillance footage placed them together in secret meetings before the murders, and bank records tied Eric directly to the suspicious withdrawals that funded the poison. Sabrina sat stone-faced through much of the testimony, occasionally shaking her head but offering little in the way of defense. Her attorneys argued she had been manipulated by Eric, that she acted under pressure from a man she loved. But the prosecution countered with the most damning fact of all. Sabrina had been the one to cook, to serve, and to sit at the table while 4 innocent lives slipped away. Eric's attorneys painted him as bitter but not homicidal, suggesting Sabrina had taken his complaints too far. Yet the trail of messages, meetings, and cash made it impossible to separate him from the conspiracy. He had provided the motive, the poison, and the encouragement. In the end, the jury returned swift verdicts. Sabrina Fields was found guilty on all 4 counts of malice murder. The judge, citing the magnitude of her betrayal, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric Mitchell was convicted of conspiracy and criminal solicitation of murder. He received a long sentence exceeding 40 years, ensuring he would spend most of his life behind bars. When the sentences were read, Gloria Daniels wept quietly in the back of the courtroom, clutching a photograph of her daughter and grandchildren. For her, justice had come, but it could never fill the emptiness left behind. The case closed with a haunting truth. Tasha's compassion, the very trait that defined her, had become the doorway to her family's destruction. In opening her home to a friend, she had unknowingly invited in betrayal so cold it defied comprehension. And in that betrayal, a mother and 3 children lost their lives, leaving behind a lesson the community would never forget.